In this recording, we're looking at the question Itsl, which is focused on customer profitability analysis. So I'm assuming you've read through the question. We're going to focus on part A initially, which is asked you prepare profitability analysis for each segment, and we're asked particular outputs then. And then part B and C is about the analysis and the insights that you can give based on your financial figures. So they're not dissimilar to an activity-based costing question. In this case, we're looking at customer segments. So we have three segments in this IT solutions company. We have segment A, B, and C, and you can each of them have a different service mix from IT training and web management. Now what's important to note is we kind of changed the structure of the question here. We don't give you direct costs directly in the question. What we tell you is what the gross profit margin is. Now you will hopefully have looked at the online little tutorial on markup and margin. This will make sense to you. By knowing what the margin is, we can figure out what the gross profit is. So it kind of allows us to go back and be able to calculate profitability without technically knowing what the direct costs are. So if we know this, we can actually skip the direct costs because we know implicitly then if gross profit is 40% for IT training, direct costs must be 60% of revenue. Because there's only two things that are made up in it. It's either going to be a profit or it's going to be your cost. So we'll just draw out those three. Segment A, B, and C. The revenue is quite straightforward. It's given in the question. And just for simplification, we're going to drop the last three zeros just to make it easier to fit all on the page. So the revenue here is 22 million, so we'll put 22,000, 30 million, 30,000, and 45 million, 45,000. So all we're doing is dropping the last three zeros to make it easier to present. So that was your first thing, revenue. You're also then asked for your gross profit. Now this is where usually we need to know direct costs before we get our profit per segment. What they tell us here is they give you the gross profit for the IT training and they give you the gross profit margin for web management. So if we know that, we can split the revenue and then get the gross margin on each piece. So there's actually a little step to go before this. So you might come here to note 1 and we'll go for each division. So you have, for example, segment A. Segment A is total of 22 million. So we'll say that's total revenue, of which IT training, and then we'll saw web management. So you have to split it 11 and 11. The reason we're splitting it is these have two different profitabilities. If you look at here, all else being equal, web management is more profitable than IT training. So what we're saying here then is the gross profit. So the gross profit, the margin on IT training you're told is 40%. Let's just put that as a percentage. And then it's 55% for web management. So all else being equal, web manager is more profitable on a margin basis. And what we're saying then, if 11 million revenue is coming from IT training, you multiply that by 40%, so your gross profit after you take off your direct labor costs associated with that service is 4.4, and your gross profit for web management is that times 55%. So even though they have the same revenue figure, they have different gross profits because the margin earned is different on each one. So margin is a nice way of presenting and allowing comparability across different sizes as well. Just so happen that these two are the same size because it's a 50-50 split. Right? So that means your total gross profit there will be 44 plus 6050. So 10450 is the total gross profit for division A. And just put in our segment A, 10450, and they also ask you for the margin. So your gross profit margin. Margin is profit over revenue. So here it'll be 10450 over the 22. And you put that, just to be careful in Excel, put that in percentages. So what we're saying there is the overall margin for segment A is 48%, or if you want to be more specific to one decimal, 47.5. And that makes sense because essentially it's going to be halfway between the 40 and the 55 because you sell half IT training and half web management in the mix for A. So what we're doing then is we're repeating that structure for B. B's total revenue is 30 million. 20% or 6,000 is for IT training and 24 million, should I say, is for website management. So this company has a lot more mix in web management. And remember, web management is the more profitable one because web management is 55%. So your gross profit here then, you're going to have 6 million at 40%, 2.4 million gross profit after you take off your direct costs, and then 24 million times 55%. So you can see that's quite profitable in terms of the web management here. They have a lot more sales mix or service mix for web management, and it's a lot more profitable. So when you add those two together, the total gross profit there is 15,000 or 15.6 million if we're looking at millions. So just split it out and then working back. So you see, you need to be able to understand the question. That's why I said make sure you go back and look at markup or margin. That's an important aspect on terms used in accounting. So this is 15,600. And then your gross profit margin, a kind of what we call a blended one, across both of the service mixes, so an overall one, is actually here 52%. So much higher than A because the service mix changes. And you can see here it's more weighted towards B because you're doing a lot more. You're doing 80% of web management and only 20% of IT training. So the service mix, or what we call the sales mix, has a big influence on profitability as well. And lastly then is segment C. They have 45 million, the biggest division. However, it's also heavily weighted towards IT training. 70% is IT training and 30% is web management. So overall, they're selling a lot more of the lower profitability service. So to get their gross profit then, you have to work by each service line. IT training gross profit will be 40%. Web management gross profit will be multiply the revenue by 55%. So that means your total gross profit will be the 12.6 plus the 7.4. So they're making just over 20 million because we've dropped the last three zeros for division C. 20,025. And if you slot that in and you get the margin, you can see here it's actually only 44.5. And the reason it's lower of all three is it has the worst service mix. It sells the most of the lower valuable or the lower profitable IT training service. So straight away, one of your insights will be, will you want to focus on changing your service mix initially? Because if you can get more to website management, it's more profitable. Because of course, IT training itself is probably very labor intensive. Hence you'll have a lot of direct labor costs. So you see, this is all using accounting information to kind of inform customer profitability, but also inform decision making as well. So there are our first couple of requirements, gross profit and gross profit margin. Our problem is now, we're not really interested in gross profit. We want to know what's our operating profit once we take off all the non-labor costs. Because of course we have labor costs, which can be directly attached to each of the services. So they're called direct costs. But these are all essentially our overheads. And we have here 24 million of overheads that need to be allocated. And we need to figure out then what's the best way to allocate them. Of course, you could crudely just divide by 3 and allocate them across each segment. But we know from activity-based costing, we can be a bit more accurate. And we can use the cost pools, which are legal, admin and user support, with a relevant cost driver. And we can then more accurately allocate to each segment, depending on how much of each activity is used. And you can see here, legal, segment A uses an awful lot of changes. Admin, segment C uses a lot of interactions, but segment A is not too far behind. And then segment A uses a huge amount of phone calls as well. So it seems to be very resource intensive. Therefore, under activity-based costing, it should get allocated more of the cost or more of the overhead. So what we're going to call this then is your non-labor costs. And we have to allocate legal, we have to allocate admin, and we have to allocate user support. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go to a note 2, and we're going to use these information here to allocate the overall overhead, which is 24 million. Now you might try that DoubleExit at yourself, pause the screencast, see can you make a stab at it to allocate it across, and we'll walk through it again to compare. So we're now on note 2, and we have each activity. So we're looking at legal, which has, just remember we're looking at dropping the last 3 zeros, 6 million. We have admin, which is 8 million, and we have user support, which has 10 million. So the overall overhead here is 24 million. And we need to divvy that up, but instead of using a single bucket, 24 million and one driver, we split it into 3, based on the main activities, what we call activity cost pools. So your 6, your 8, and your 10 are known as activity cost pools. And each one then will have a driver, and you're told the driver, the legal is driven by the changes in service agreements, on the assumption that the more changes, the more legal costs you have. Admin is driven on interactions, and user support is driven on the number of phone calls. So we get the volume of each relevant driver. So the volume here will be 3,000 changes. That's 1,500 plus 800 plus 700. So the total changes are 1,500. That means the cost per driver is, now just be careful because this is a full figure and this is actually 6 million. So be careful of your interpretation here. It's 6 million divided by 3,000. 2,000 per change. So if you got 2 per change, you've forgotten that this is actually 6 million, not 6,000. So watch for that when you are summarizing the figures. For the admin, there's 35,000 interactions, 20 plus 45. So 35,000 plus 20,000 plus 45,000. You have a total of 100,000 interactions. And be careful, it's 8 million euro. So you're trying to get a cost per interaction. 8 million divided by 100,000. So 8 euro per interaction. So these are useful because remember, if you just skipped and did the proportion here, you wouldn't have got the information needed for part C. Discuss any insight for activity-based management. So try, particularly for the earlier on questions, do it out in a cost per driver. This is what we call cost per driver, because that can be very useful for decision making and projecting cost in the future. And then user support then, there was 10,000 phone calls, there was 10 million of user support costs. So that means the cost was, should be another 0 there, too many zeros, 10 million is 1,000 per call. So that should be 1 million, 1, 2, 3, or 10 million divided by 10,000. So 1,000 per call. So you now have your costs per driver. 2,000 per change the legal agreement, 800 per interaction, and 1,000 per call. And when you have that, you can allocate to each segment. Segment A, so we'll just do A, B, and C. And what we're doing is we'll allocate the legal, the admin, and the user support. Because we know what portion of each of them use. So the higher the use, the higher the allocation. So that's what activity-based costing is, activity-focused, and it seems to be a fair allocation. The more you use of a driver, the more you should get allocated that cost. So for example here, segment A has used 1,500 changes, so they should have 1,500 times 2,000. Now just be careful here. That of course is going to get you to 3 million, but we are using, now we can leave it in figures if you want, but sometimes if you're using euros or euro drop the last 3 zeros, you might divide by 1,000. So just be careful which figures you're using. I'm not dividing by 1,000 here, but if you're bringing it up to the final table, you might want to drop the last 3 zeros just to summarize. But that's a full, just a euro figure I'm using here now, not summarized down. For B then, it's going to be 800 times 2,000. And then for C, it's going to be 700 times 2,000. And if you want to just double check, what's the total legal costs? They should sum to 6 million, and they do. So we know we're correct there, we've allocated it out. Same for admin, it's 35,000 times 80 for segment A, 80 euro per interaction. It's 20,000 times 80 for segment B, and it is 45,000, because that's the highest, times 80 for segment C. So the more interactions you use, the more cost you're getting allocated. And that is allocating the full 8 million, which we have from the question. So you can always sense check back in a lot of questions whether or not you're on the right track. And last but not least, then for every phone call, you're going to get allocated €1,000. 5,000 times 1,000 is 5 million. 1,000 times €1,000 is 1 million. And 4,000 calls times €1,000 is 4 million. And that, thankfully, is, when we stretch it out, 10 million. We've now allocated each cost pool based on activities. Now, this, if you think in pragmatic terms, this takes a bit of getting collection. So there's going to be time and effort to collect all of that. But if you're going to get more accurate information in terms of how profitable each segment is, then it's going to give you better information for decision making. So you always have to weigh up the pros and cons of implementing these new methods. Sometimes it's worthwhile, but sometimes the costs will outweigh the benefits, and that every company will have to make those decisions. So what we can do now is we'll transfer these cost figures. Remember now we're dropping the last 3 zeros because we're bringing them back up here. We're trying to get the non-labor costs, and we've done these in note 2. Right, so all you're doing, if I make this a bit bigger, we're taking the allocation here, 3, 2, 8, and 5, and we're putting it here. 3 million, 2, 8, and 5 million. So the total cost allocated to A is 10.8 million. Notice here, I'm doing this with 3 zeros dropped. So because you're adding and subtracting here, you must keep this consistency. That's why we're dropping the last 3 zeros. So this is 1,600, 1,600, and a million. So that is 4.2 of costs for segment B. And finally then you have 1,436, 36, and the last one is 4 million. And that is 9 million costs for segment C. So we have our gross profit. You take off your costs. That'll get you operating profit. So it's gross profit minus your other costs, which we can call overheads. That means your operating profit for A is minus 350,000. So actually I'll put in brackets in a loss. So if it's a loss is in brackets. So segment A is actually losing money when you take off the non-labor costs. And this one, 15.6 minus 4.2. Segment B is earning 11.4 million. And here, segment C is earning 11 million. So both of them are nearly the same profitability, but segment A, so I'll just change that to put a negative, I put a bracket on it just to make it a bit clearer. You can go and format your cell, just to put it in red and negative. So they ask us that in terms of the operating profit, and they also ask us for the margin. So your operating profit margin, which is a percentage. So here it's going to be a negative figure. It's 350 loss. Margin is always profit over revenue. So you're negative there, 2 or 1.6%. Here you're earning 11.4 million over 30 million revenue. Just format those. 38%. And finally then, the last one, if I click it across, you're earning 24.5%. So we can see here B has the best service mix, therefore it has the best gross profit margin, and it also has the best operating profit margin. While A has the second best gross profit margin, it actually uses an awful lot more of the non-labor costs. And that is coming from your activity analysis here. It uses half of all changes, 1,500 out of 3,000. It uses the second most amount of interactions, and it's well ahead in terms of it uses half of all the calls as well. So it takes a significant amount of overheads. So what we'd say is the customers in segment A, they're resource intensive, right? Yes, you have a decent gross profit, but that is eaten away when you look at all the overheads that they consume. And that can happen in many businesses where certain customers can take a lot of admin, a lot of ordering, a lot of returns, a lot of interaction, a lot of sales effort, and you may not be getting the return then when you look at the overall profitability. Right. So that is our answer to part A. We've given the revenue, the gross profit and the margin, and the operating profit and the margin. And the main focus we wanted to look at was here, where you're allocating costs now, not to a product, but you're allocating to a customer segment. But you're still using the whole principle of activity-based costing. You allocate the indirect costs, which are hard to track to each customer, based on the use of activities. And we had 3 main activities here: legal costs, admin, and user support. So for part B then, we're looking at comment on the relative profitability. And again, that's just what we've done here in terms of, while all of them are profitable at gross profit margin level, there's a big change in terms of segment D. And we explained that's why, because it's more resource intensive compared to B and C, which look completely differently from an operating profit margin. So that's what you're always interested in, is the true profitability at the bottom line. It's one thing being profitable at gross margin, but it also must cover its overhead costs as well. So we're just looking for you to make a quick comment on each one. The differences of gross profit margin are down to the sales mix. So the more web management that you do, the more profitable you'll be at gross margin. But the difference at operating profit margin also combines the impact of how much you use of the overhead activities. So there's a dual impact there in terms of how you manage it. The final piece then is getting at the idea of activity-based management, and they ask you any potential insights. Now, we would be expecting students here to look at both perspectives. So you can look at the final solution. We would be expecting you to make some suggestions around operational ABM, which is focusing on improving your activities. So for example, we can look at here, operational ABM might look at the cost of each of these activities. 2,000 per legal change, 80 euro per interaction, 1,000 euro per call. And you might be able to make some recommendations. For example, can we reduce the complexity of the legal agreements to reduce the number of changes? Or can we reduce the specific nature of the legal agreements to reduce the number of changes? So there's a balance there because the cost of that change is very high. Likewise, is there any way we can use online supports or frequently asked questions or web chats to reduce the number of phone calls into the center? Because the user support seems to be a very high cost base. So what we're focusing on that aspect is operational ABM. The ability to improve what you currently do the things right, not change what you're doing, but trying to do them better without damaging customer value. The other thing we would expect for students to reference here is the other type of ABM, strategic activity-based management. And that could be around here, questioning which customer segments you should actually be serving. Should we be serving customer segment A, given that it's loss-making? Now, it could be the case that you may need more information to see if one segment leads to another, such as the youth market and banking will lead to segment B, which is the young couple market, on to segment C, etc. So you might have to caveat your recommendations that you're making them based on narrow financial information. But you might also, from a strategic perspective, say, maybe we should look at our pricing. Should we need to price better in terms of the offerings, given that customer segment A uses a lot more of the non-labor costs? Or should we try and remarket our offerings to try and push more of web management towards Division A to improve the profitability? But we're just looking from a strategic perspective to figure out, should we be doing particular things? Should we be targeting segment A anymore, given it's loss-making, or how might we improve that profitability position? So when you're asked for ABM, typically we're looking for at least discussion of both approaches. Operational ABM, improving your current activities, and strategic ABM, thinking more strategically about, should we be in this customer segment? Should we be offering these services? And how might we improve our position from a strategic perspective? So that was looking at customer profitability analysis, which is an applied area of activity-based costing.